Welcome. Today is Wednesday. Welcome to my open rehearsal sessions with violin question and answer. Thank you for joining. Yes, today I have an interesting program to share with you. Many segments that would be posted to my Patreon page. At the end of today's program, or the entire session will be posted on my Patreon. So please support my work. You can join me on Patreon and you'll be able to enjoy all the pre-recorded open sessions as well as all the other tutorials for all levels, basically from beginning all the way to intermediate, advanced, tips on practicing, and also performance videos that you can enjoy. So usually what I like to start off with is the different ways to warm up, right? And if we're taking time to warm up, might as well work on some very basic things. Perhaps we can make use of the warm-up time and actually correct some of the habits we need to change or form new habits. So today what I want to talk about is hand frame, but I'm just going to do a little bit of warm-up to give you an idea. So just a little sample of what I use as a finger exercise when I warm up. Now we know that there are several finger patterns. So perhaps we can think of a finger pattern being first, 2, 3, half step, 1, 2, half step. Then they're all open, as in if you have a low 1, so your first finger is stretched back. In this case, I'm not too concerned about a low 4, because if my third finger is in tune, my 4 will be just right next to it. So it's good to start with the mind thinking that I'm going to come to this, then I'm going to come to, so you always start with a fist, right? Then I'm going to do 1, 2 together. And then I'm going to do all separate, whole step, right? So this is a little exercise that you can do without the violin. So it's more a mindset, mind to finger action. Yeah. And then when we do it on the violin, here's the thing. I start slow because I want to make sure that I am tuning each finger. For example, if I'm on the G string, my first finger is A. And if I'm tuning it against D, it will be a perfect fourth. So any perfect interval, I want to be very careful that I'm listening to it and it's in tune. Now the B and D, the closest string of course is open D. Now it's a minor third, so you want to keep the minor third slightly bigger. Normally with the third finger you will have an open lower string to tune to. In this case, on the G string, and you tune your 4 to D. So this is how slow, and you notice that my bow is as slow as I need to tune. So don't move the bow very fast, because the frequency and the speed of the vibration of the string will distort and also will distract you from listening to the pitch. And then I will speed up, but connect everything in one bow, so that this is also a practice for a long, slow bow to keep the bow very, very steady. Again, the perfect fourth, but this time with a B flat. Now, if it's a major third, you might want to keep the interval just slightly under. It would sound in tune. But if you play it will sound out of tune. Yes, so if it's a major third, you want to actually keep the B flat slightly under. What I'm trying to say is keep the interval a little closer. Yeah, but if it's a minor third, you might want to keep it a little bit bigger so that it will sound in tune when it's played together. Now, about playing with slow, steady bow, we know that the bow has a balancing point, and mine is about here, two-thirds or the lower one-third of the way. You sort of have to experiment and find it. So anywhere that is below the balancing point is when we really have to slow down to keep the bow as steady as we can. So in this case, just very light. When you're in the lower half of the bow, once you get past the balancing point, you do need to engage your pinky and the muscle next to it more in order to have more control. By control, it doesn't really mean you're making the bow to do anything. It's just that it means that the bow is more, it feels like the bow is in your hand more. So you're not just going to allow it to move however it wants. So you're actively or quite actively balancing the bow at this point. Now notice that because our hand frame is always going with 1/4, basically it's the same as when you play octave. So it will be like this waving motion, and then when you just let it rest, come to the rest position, you notice that the thumb and the middle two fingers somewhat form a circle, and your first finger is free to stretch back. So when you're doing a 3-whole step, which is technically a tritone, your first finger stretch back half a step into a half step position or a half position, but the rest of the hand remains. So that's how you can secure your intonation. Now, as you go to the E string, of course, instead of a third, you're listening to a sixth. And here you have an octave. So notice when I do this sort of finger warm up, I am not at this point concerned about the dynamics. So I'm just keeping everything very steady and making sure that I play with a steady bow. And of course, you can also use this as an exercise eventually to add dynamics to it, to practice the velocity of bow speed. That would be a very, very good exercise too. So we talk about the hand frame, the finger pattern today, but I also want to show you a step beyond this. Is how do we incorporate all this into playing octaves? In essence, when we play octave, it will be the same as placing 1/4 at the same time on two separate strings. So in essence, we're repeating the finger exercise that we did earlier, but this time in octaves. Then I will try between D and A. And because we're basing this this octave exercise on the finger pattern that we established earlier, so the key really does not matter, because we're going to run through all the different finger pattern. So make sure that I tune anytime that the notes coincide with an open string. The trick here is when it's a half step, I don't quite shift. Instead, I'm in between a half position. But when I'm shifting a whole step, yes, the key is to make sure that your thumb is relaxed and it's flexible to move. When it comes to the E flat, the only open string that left that we can tune to is your open G string. So that will give you a -6. exercise that we just did basically is repeating the finger pattern exercise that we have established before. So from that exercise, we already train our ears how to listen for the pitch, whether it's half step, whole step, and very sure about whether we're shifting from half step or going to a half step or a whole step, right? And then we repeat the same thing, and this time we add octaves to it. So the pitch is already in our head. It's just about confirming to ourselves what we found out, what we discover. And it's important that when we are playing double stops, in this case playing octaves, that our bow is evenly, or the weight of the bow is evenly distributed between the two strings. Now, many times I do lean toward the lower note as the sort of the reference point to tune my octaves, which is the first finger usually, right? So we depend on a stronger finger to be the guiding finger and tune the fourth finger, or if you're doing fingered octaves, the higher octave to tune to the lower octave. But it's also important that after a while we reverse the role. So train the weaker finger to be the guiding finger, and your first finger, or the lower note, will be the supporting finger. So we need to be able to identify the pitch, whether it's a higher octave or the lower octave. So hopefully this is a little idea for you to make your warm-up exercise a little more interesting and more challenging every day. Of course, as we discuss it, it seems like it's a longer time, but if you are doing a little bit every day, probably 5 to 8 minutes is fine. Yeah. Now, mind you, this is warm up. It's not really your intensive, if you want to get into intensive scale arpeggios, double stops. So, of course, those are more for perhaps bowing exercise and for speed and accuracy. Now, welcome. We have a few who are joining us. Now, I am not quite able to see your chats. I'm not sure if I'm perhaps able to read your chat yet. All right, but I should be able to see your chats, right? Let me see. Yeah. Yeah. All right, so if you are a violin player, violin student, and you have questions about playing the violin, please feel free to text it onto the live chat sections, and I can perhaps answer you right away, or simply demonstrate, show you some tips. Now, the next segment of today's sessions is on a very popular piece by Camille Saint-Saëns, The Swan. Now, this is a segment, my take on, that I have started last year, that I select a musical work, and I talk about my interpretation, talk about some of the technical elements that is involved in sort of achieving the musical elements that I intended. So yeah, today I want to share with you The Swan by Camille Saint-Saëns. So a little bit about this piece, right? Of course, you might know already, it's a piece from the Carnival of Animals, and it's the second last selection from the entire set of music. Now, when it was first written, Saint-Saëns had in mind the cello student Now, in fact, it was for his cello student recital debut. So it's very appropriate because if you think about swan, an actual swan, if you actually go to a lake, look at how they, you know, they don't really fly a lot, I think. But I think the most majestic moment is when you can see it land. You know, it was flying and then it lands on the water. And of course, when they call, it almost sounds like trumpeting call. Now, it's that majestic moment and the calmness that follows that I think Camille Saint-Saëns wants to capture. And this is a very serene, just graceful character of the swan. We know that the swan can also have other characters, right? And other composers have written works about swans. But bear in mind that this is a minimalist piece, just capturing the moment of the swan in the lake. So we wanna just think of, you know, when the music starts, we just arrive at the scene, and you know, things are already happening, right? And then we just came, and we capture this moment, right? So if we think about this, this piece, even though now it's very popular on the violin, I do think that the cello probably captures that majestic, that magnificence of the swan, the motion, right, of the swan. In that Saint-Saëns gave the time signature 6/4 rather than 3/4 is something to think about, because 3/4 usually we think of like a waltz, faster dance, but now it's a 6/4. It's graceful, but then it's broader, it's bigger. And so here we have, I think, 2 measures of introduction from the piano. Let's listen. Yeah, so that was the 6 counts before the instrument comes in, or the, you know. But I think you heard the piano accompany depicting, making references to this watery gesture, right? The water gesture, to suggest that, hey, we're talking about a swan in the water. And at the end of the measure, you hear the landing of the swan into the water. Yeah, it's not a big splash, but it was a gentle, graceful, you know, sort of announcement that the presence of this majestic creature. Now, having that set the tone of the swan, now we have to think about the character when the violin comes in. It shouldn't be something that is like, I am too afraid to play this piece, or I'm not sure if I came in right. You know, this presence, the first statement is so important. So perhaps I will play a little bit, and then we can talk about. Thank you very much. So to give you an idea how this piece sounds like. Now, as we mentioned earlier, this water motion is already introduced in the very beginning, 6 beats by the piano, and the motion continues on in the entire piece. And when the violin comes in, we are in 6/4. In that sense, I think of 2 and 2 and 2, even though the bowing is three notes to a bow. So we basically have 2 broad bow. Here is the thing: how do we make it give it this broad expression instead of it becoming very mechanical, 3 note in a bow, 2 bows, like, that's 3/4. If we have 3 counts in a measure, that can easily become a problem, right? Now, the fact that it's in 6/4, we need to think. So beat 3 and 4 somehow needs to connect. Because if we put it in 2 and 2 and 2, beat 3 and beat 4 will be then in one group. And intermix with the broader 3 and 3 beat. So in our head, we need to be able to put those sort of, feels like doing math in our mind, in order to think bigger than just 3/4. Now, we want to be careful about bow distribution. Now, if we spend too much bow on the first note, then inevitably the third of the note the third beat will then have a shorter bow, and we're going to have a harder time to connect beat 3, which is the end of the bow, to the beginning of the next beat 4. So what we want to do is we want to divide the bow in 3 parts. So here is a little exercise for bow distribution. For example, if I take one note, stop at 1/3, 1/3, and another 1/3. And you notice I only pause the bow at 1/3, but not when I'm connecting the last third into the next beginning bow. So at both ends of the bow, I don't stop. So rather, pause, pause, and connect. Up, down, connect. Down, up. And as I connect the bow, I want to make sure that I'm engaging the muscle at the pinky, because that is what will help to sort of glue the changing of bow together. Now I will start with something like piano. And gradually add more. And gradually increase in dynamics and volume, and perhaps add vibrato. Now this is an exercise for the bow, so I'm not concerned about what note I'm particular playing. I just choose D. You can choose another note, or sometimes I choose a harder note that is harder to speak. For example, C natural. I'm very concerned about the connection at both ends. Whether I'm at the frog playing up down or at the tip playing down up, I want to make sure that the connection is as seamless, as natural in my hand as possible. Now, again, I sort of pause the bow just so that I feel where the 1/3 bow is. Now, eventually we add the changing notes. Knowing that when we add changing notes, we don't really want to stop the bow, but we want to make sure that we actually change the note on 1/3 mark. So that's why it's important that when we get to practice in front of the mirror, to actually eyeball where 1/3 is, and also feel where our elbow is, whether it's acute angle or a bigger angle, you know. I think last week we talked about our angle forming or our elbow forming a right angle when we are in the middle of the bow, right? So if it's in the lower half, it will be about 45 degrees. If it's in the upper half, our elbow will form somewhat 120 degrees. Yeah. So let's try the beginning, right? So we connect, but using subdividing the bow into thirds. Now at this point, I don't add any pressure to my bow because we're in the key of G, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Right? So in the key of G, we have a lot of overtones, we have a lot of open strings that we can allow the string to vibrate. For example, your first note is a G. You know, there's E, there's A, you know. So I don't want to press on the bow yet, or press on the string yet. I want to allow to see how much the string can vibrate and give me back the sound before I add anything extra to it. So at this point, I am very conscious that I'm only using 1/3 bow and not past it. So perhaps slow down the bow first. So the trick is, for the last 8th note, I just simply subdivide the last 1/3 bow into 2, and that gives you the 8th. So in this case, you will find that the same pattern repeat with your bowing, and you can start thinking about how to make it a little more variation, how to create more perhaps dynamic by implementing different bow speed. Now, perhaps also try to add a little vibrato, because vibrato helps for the to bring out the sound, right? So we want to be careful that while we're working on the bow division or subdivision of the bow, we don't slow it down too much. So it's good to play with the track, piano accompaniment if you could find one. Even if it's not what you will eventually decide to play, having a track helps to find out if you're dragging behind or if you're rushing. So somewhat it's a very useful tool. So let's start from the top. Now, I would like to talk about the two scales that climbs up, ascending scale. So naturally, it will bring a, even though it's not written out crescendo, but an ascending scale technically is a written out crescendo in itself. So how can we achieve a crescendo when we try to maintain that kind of tranquility, right, with the bow? So start last. Since we have two scales, two ascending scales, we might want to leave the second one more. So the first one, sort of keep it to yourself. Don't do a big crescendo and give it all out. So perhaps I'm going to start my crescendo in the fourth beat, the second half of the measure. And notice that your second ascending scale is starting a step higher. That already suggests that this is going to reach even higher or louder in volume. The second ascending scale starts one whole step higher. However, the landing note is a third above the previous landing note. So that suggests this is going to a higher point. And from this point, continue to develop. So you don't want to back up or play softer here, but keep the same quality. Now, this piece is actually in adagio. How do we maintain the quality, sound quality, while slow? And this is at a pretty loud tone. Playing a little closer to the fingerboard, right? And keeping a very steady bow speed at the very start. So you want to sort of conserve your bow. Conserve your bow at the lower 1/3. So from the start. So if you go fast and then slow, you're going to lose some sound. So maintain. And it's important that we start on the string somehow or very close to the string so we get a full sound. So what we don't want is to get so think about it, it's still 6/4. So if you do separate bow, it will be so it will be down up, 3 sets of down up. So you're in essence thinking 3 sets of 2. Now, maintain that 3 sets of 2, but use the written bowing, which is 3-note a bow. So you will get a very full sound on beat 3 and 5. This is how you can maintain sound throughout 6 counts. Now, if you do a little bit expansion into beat 6, so the 6th beat will lead to the next measure, next beat 1, right? Now, the meter 6/4 is a compound time. We know that eventually is a big 2. But if we're working on bowing, we want to understand how we distribute each count within the 6 count. Then we need to think about these details as to how are we going to divide the beats. And how do we connect the end of one bow to the next? All these little details will help to paint eventually a broader and longer melodic line. Now, yeah, so here is the second half is exactly the same, except you have the option to play an octave higher to challenge yourself, and I like that option. Or you can just play at the lower octave as written. Yeah, so this is a very, very beautiful piece. At this moment, I'm going to check to see if there's any questions or comments. Wow, time flies. It has been an hour already. All right, very good. So perhaps we're going to spend some time also talking about shifting. And I thought that this swan is really good example of explaining or implementing the principle of shifts. Now I'm going to explain what that means in a moment. Yeah, so I would like to talk about the principle of shifts. And we know that shifting technically means we go from one note to the next or one hand frame to the next hand frame. A lot of times we're talking about moving between positions. Shifting, in fact, involve 3 steps. So first is the release of the old note. Whatever finger you're playing the old note, you must release it. By release, I'm not talking about lifting the finger. By release, it means you're not pressing down onto the string, but allow the finger to just simply touch the surface of the string. So that's step 1, is release. Step 2 is the gliding action. So it's no jump, it's not a skip, it's actually gliding along the string. And step 3 is once you get to your targeted note, you land on the targeted note. So let's review these 3 steps. First is you release the finger. Second, glide along the string. And all the while, the finger does not leave the string. So the finger is still touching, have slight contact with the string. And step 3 is to drop the finger on the targeted note. Now, how do we ensure that our shifts are in tune? The key comes in, if you can sing it, you can play it in tune. You must have the targeted note in mind, in your vision, before you even start the shift. So this can be done during practice, that very, very slowly. In fact, the best way to practice is while you're practicing scale. I highly recommend practicing scale with one finger on one string. So what happens is you will be shifting, for example, with your first finger. Like that. Every step is a shift or a stretch, right? Now, if you're used to this exercise, then shifting becomes much easier because you're already hearing shift by steps. Now, if I am shifting a third, how does a third sound like? It will be, or anyhow, I'm taking away the second step of the notes. I am concerned about my first initial note and my landing note. Yes, so I know my initial note and I can hear my landing note. Now let's try to incorporate the 3 steps into shifting. So first I have to release my initial finger, which is my first finger. So what we call harmonics. My finger is simply touching the string, not lifting. And if I play it, it's almost like invisible, but it's there. Second step is glide. Now I find my targeted note and drop. So let me do it this way. My initial note is B, my first finger. Release my first finger, which is the old note now. And I know that the shift, the glide, is actually 3 steps. And you notice that I'm also move my bow at extremely slow. How slow? As slow as I move my left hand finger that is shifting. So the speed of the shift and the speed of my bow is exactly the same. And the landing note. So I'm very careful not to use a whole bow, especially during the shift. I will use as little bow as possible because really it's for me to listen to the interval. My audience, they don't need to hear the shift at this point. Now sometimes another kind of shifting is that we land on a different finger. So we shift on one, release, glide. Once we get to the target note, we land on second finger. So a third will become a fourth. I also need to check the pitch. Now this happens in Swan. That's why I say it's a really good example of practicing shifts. And in this case, our initial note and the note, landing note after the shift, it's on a separate, it's on a different bow. So we can eventually use the bow change to sort of hide the shift. Same here. And same thing, we want to make sure we remember the subdivision of bow. All right, so the second ascending scale. Right? So we want to slow down the bow, really slow bow to help with this shift so that we're not in a rush and we allow the shift to happen, take place as finish the process and properly land on the new note. All right. So these are the few examples in this piece that I would want to bring out. And so every time there is a shift, whether we are playing a scale or simply playing a melodic and expressive line, be sure to isolate the shift itself. Now, every shift involves two notes. So we have to identify the initial note and have the landing note in our mind. We need to be able to hear it before we play it. And once we start shifting, the purpose really is to confirm that landing note to the note that we hear in our mind. And that way, each time we practice, we are convincing ourselves and actually helping with muscle memory. Yes, so I hope you have enjoyed this segment, my take on early earlier, we have a question from a violin student about Gluck melody. I don't know if you are here today or not, because I cannot see any comments. Yeah, I remember last time I can see comments. So perhaps this time, I don't know if I press something different. But also to remind you guys that we actually have a change in time zone this past weekend. So for some places, instead of 5 hours apart, it will be 4 hours apart. For example, in England, it will be 4 hours ahead and not 5 hours. And for the rest of Europe, it will be 5 hours ahead. So I hope those friends remember that. I'm able to tune in, because this program is not on replay, but it will be posted on my Patreon page. So if you join me on Patreon, you will be able to enjoy every week's live stream program, including today's open rehearsal session with violin Q&A, also of course live stream concerts, and also a lot of the tutorial videos for beginner, intermediate, and advanced students. Now, I will save that question for next time, because this is, I think, a question that Ben had asked. Yeah. The remaining time, perhaps I will just demonstrate a little bit about the hand frame that I was mentioning from before. So I do have a program, violin program, called Violin Studio with Sharon. And these are short videos, concise, with explanation of the skill, demonstration, and with also a short excerpt. And sometimes there's even a play along or practice along track that my student can follow along and practice with me. So today I would like to talk about hand frame for your left hand. So I call it violin hand. The most natural hand frame is when you shake your hand or wave your hand, let it fall into a natural position. You will notice that your thumb and the middle two fingers naturally form a circle. And this is how your hand frame should be. And you notice that my wrist is in a very natural position. Forearm, wrist, and hand is aligned in somewhat a straight line. And when I put my left hand on the neck of the violin, I want to be conscious that I'm creating somewhat a letter U with my thumb and the side of my index finger. So technically, it's the side of the thumb and the middle knuckle of the index finger contact the neck of the violin, like such. I actually already have a video that explain in details. In fact, I think it's a 3-part videos preparing students how to hold the violin. So the 3 points of contacts that we employ to hold the violin is side of your left chin on the chin rest, the letter U that is formed by the side of the thumb and the side of the index finger. Yeah. Now, when it comes to using our fingers, having a natural hand position is very important. Allowing the thumb to be completely free. So the thumb in essence is between first and second finger. So that when these fingers fall, they sort of form a square. And your first finger also form a square. Instead of bent, your finger should create somewhat like a box. Now, when you drop and lift the fingers, right, the action initiates from the knuckle, the lower knuckle of each finger. So we do not move fingertips, even though it is the fingertips that contacts the string. And that is also very important. But whenever we have the action of lift and drop in each finger, the action starts with the lower knuckle. And we, as you notice, I am not using my bow. We can do this exercise together without a bow. So let's put your first finger down and second finger whole step apart, and we do lift, drop, lift, drop, and do it slow enough so you can feel the action actually starts with the lower knuckle. Lift, drop, and you can put your other hand on the knuckle to feel the movement. Now this time we're going to keep the second finger down and lift your one. And again, is from the knuckle. The action is from the knuckle. It really doesn't matter how far you lift your finger, as in how far from the string. As long as it's not touching the string, you know that finger is not going to be played. So the lift and drop action is extremely important, because if you have a habit of sliding fingers around from the fingertip, first of all, intonation will be distorted. Eventually, we're going to have a lot of problem with shifting, playing in tune, and also it gets the hand very tiring very quickly. So making sure we develop good habit from the start is super important. So that's one little exercise you can do. Now, what we just did was 1 and 2 form a whole step. So it looks like this. The other 2 fingers, we're not too worried about. So when in hand position, our thumb slightly form a circle with the middle and second and third finger, and our first finger just slightly make a straight line. And you notice that I make somewhat a box. Second finger as well, somewhat a box. So that way, you can practice it this way also, exactly the same way you will move the fingers when you're holding the violin. Yeah, so those are the things we are going to watch for. Let's do a little exercise together. If you have your violin, to practice the drop and lift of the finger to make sure that it actually will speak well, we do 4 B's and 3 A's. So have the 2 points of contact, side of the thumb, side of the index finger, and we place your first finger down on the A string, which will make your B, because from A you climb up 1 step using your first finger, you land to the next letter, which is B. We pluck the B 4 times, and we are listening for a round, broad, healthy sound. And we lift the first finger. Remember, the lifting action start from the bottom of your knuckle, and 3 A's. let's drop your first finger and pluck it 4 times. And lift. Very good. Now, one note to mention, when we drop our finger, we want to make sure we slightly favor the left side of the finger when it contacts the string. So it's the left side of your index finger that contacts the string. And let's try this again. Lift. Now this time we're going to do a reverse. We're going to do 4 A's and 3 B's. And drop. So the dropping action of the first finger initiates from the knuckle. So 4 A's. And drop your first finger. That's it. Now we talk about hand frame. We talk about practicing octaves with the hand frame. And we talked about shifting, the principle of shifts, the distribution of bow, especially when it comes to dividing the bow in thirds, and connecting bow change, both at the frog and also at the tip. We also talk about hand frame when it comes to finger placement, that we want to make sure or imagine that every point on your finger that contact the string is slightly favoring the left. So imagine you have these red dots on your finger favoring the left side slightly. And when you place the fingers on each string, you will always place it on the red dot. Yeah, so basically those are the things to look for, and that the action always start with the joint or the lower knuckle of each finger. So we include a lot today. So I hope this is helpful to those who are learning violin, and if you find these material useful and would like to review them, would like to practice along, or to be able to come back to these information again, be sure to subscribe to my Patreon, because all of these live stream sessions will be posted on my Patreon. In fact, every Wednesday I have this open rehearsal sessions on YouTube, and by Friday it will be posted on my Patreon, and along with unlimited access to all my violin tutorial videos that you can enjoy and use them as many times as you need, and also some performance videos that you can enjoy. I hope this will be a useful resource, and we will bring this program to an end today. And thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time, which is next Wednesday, 2 o'clock Eastern Time. All right, enjoy the rest of your week. Goodbye.